welcome everyone. Francisco Servent here. I think I know most of you, but not all of you. I'm the founder and managing attorney at Keystone Law Firm in Chandler. We help folks protect their assets so that their families don't fight themselves into destruction, basically. We do estate planning and estate administration. Paul Carlson has been the CPA for my firm for, I think, now 6 years or maybe going on 7, and has been a very critical advisor for us, and so he's graciously giving us his time today. We're just going to spend about 30 minutes going over a very high level, and I promise you this is going to be, unfortunately, really high level or very surface level of how you should be tracking your PPP money, because unfortunately, guess what? Nobody really knows the final rules on this. And so even, my expert Paul, and we've actually engaged the services of a law firm who basically is an expert on this stuff to help and advise us. It's a moving target every day, as it has been from the beginning. So the rules aren't final. The rules are yet to be even clarified in some instances. So what we're going to share with you is the best information that we have right now. So this is all subject to change, and I'm going to start with the lovely disclaimer that, number one, this is not legal advice for your specific situation, nor is this specific accounting or tax advice for your situation. This is general information of an educational nature. FYI, if you're doing webinars, if you're doing conferences like this with groups of people, make sure you start it out with something like that. And the second reason that we're recording this, which is another business tip for you, is that it protects you from a compliance standpoint. So nobody can come back later and say, he told me this, and I can open this back up and say, oh, actually I didn't. So 2 business tips for you there, included at no extra charge. All right, so this is really, what you're going to learn today is really only going to be super helpful if you've been approved for the PPP money, or if you basically know you're going to be. If you're not going to get any paycheck protection funds, you'll maybe be able to use this information at your next cocktail party whenever we can have those again, and show your buddies how smart you are. But really, this is after that point in the process. So you got approved, you're getting funded, or you've already got funded, and you've got this big chunk of money that is 2.5 times your payroll, and you've got to use it. So you got to use it in a way. You can either choose to, maybe you don't care about it being forgiven. It's a really low interest rate loan, which that's fine, but you may want to get it forgiven. And that was one of the big factors that drew so much demand for this thing was, oh my gosh, we can get 2.5 months of payroll and get it forgiven as a benefit right now from the SBA through the CARES Act that was passed recently. So what we're going to be talking about today only applies if you want to get this money forgiven. Okay, if you just want to take it as a loan, there's other criteria, other rules that are going to apply to you. We're not really going to hit on that much today. This is just if you want to get it forgiven. And so if you want to get it forgiven, it's free money from the government. There's going to be very strict rules about how you manage this money and spend it. Essentially what the SBA has announced is that they are going to audit every single business that has received over $2 million loans. And anybody under that, they're not going to audit everybody, but there's going to be some audits. And so you want to make sure you've got an audit-proof file here. I saw this morning, they've already filed criminal charges against some businesses that were found to be engaging in fraud already. And so they're not going to mess around with this. They know that it's free money, and they're just not going to mess around with it. So if you get this loan and you want it forgiven, you've got to make sure you've got very audit defensible positions with your records. So that's kind of the first thing that I want to make sure everyone knows is this is going to be applicable if you are looking to get it forgiven. The second thing is that you've got to spend all this money during the 8 weeks that starts on the date of your disbursement. So if the bank cut the check on May 1st, you've got 8 weeks until that money has to be gone if you want to get it forgiven. And that 8 weeks is fixed. You don't get an extension. It's just, it is what it is. After that, if there's money left over and you haven't spent it, then that's going to roll into the part that is going to become the 2-year loan, okay? So planning right now up ahead, at the beginning of the game to spend this money in a way that is forgivable is going to be crucial. And I know my team is working furiously to look at all of our upcoming expenses for the next 8 weeks to make sure we've got enough money to spend it on forgivable expenses. So those are a couple big things that I wanted to start this out with. Paul, as you've advised us, it's been critical. So I want to turn it over to you and kind of let you dig into your main bullet points for how people need to set up their accounting systems and what they can spend this on.
Sure. So do you want to bring up that spreadsheet?
Yeah, let me do that. Everybody here is now freaking out because you said the word spreadsheet.
Uh-oh.
Nah, we're good, guys. We got to do this stuff. All right. Let's see if that comes up.
Okay. All right. So I guess if your firm hasn't been approved for PPP funds and you're working with a large national bank, I would suggest today go find a small local bank and get that loan started with them. That the big national banks are just taking far too long, and even with all the loans that we're monitoring, we see some big national accounts with big national banks that still haven't heard a reply. For tracking, there's a lot of different camps and opinions on how to track this. We're going to go to a spreadsheet to track this. A lot of folks are interested or suggesting in using a dedicated bank account. Where that falls apart is, I guess one, it's very difficult to suddenly switch your payroll so it's being withdrawn from a different bank account. And then at the end, if you forget to switch payroll back to your primary operating account and you bounce a payroll, that the payroll services will kick you. The other piece is the payroll draws are at least 7% non-qualified costs. So when the payroll company pulls all the funds out of the checking account, that in those amounts includes employer payroll taxes, which are not a part of the forgiveness calculation. So we're going back to a spreadsheet and making a budget and budgeting wages by employee. And then as the actual payments are made, we're going to come back to these spreadsheets and update this, so when payroll 1 is done, that will change that column so it says actual. And so that way we're following actual gross wages by employee. The item to watch with these payrolls is in the calendar example, if your firm was funded on the 8th of April and your paycheck date is the 7th and 22nd, notice that your June 7th payroll falls outside of your 8-week spend window. So if your payroll, you got funded on the 8th, so you ran payroll on April 7th, you received PPP money on April 8th, your next payroll was April 22nd, next payroll May 7th, following payroll May 22nd, your 4th payroll that you're trying to squeeze into this 8-week period is now June 7th, which is outside of your 8-week window. And I think that's going to be a surprise for a lot of firms. So what we're hoping we can do is we're going to run that June 7th payroll so it comes out on June 2nd. And hopefully an auditor will understand, or will push the draw within the period. And the piece to watch on this is the payroll check dates that matter, not the funding dates. Let's see here. I think that's
What do you mean by that?
So paychecks, for a lot of our firms, the 7th is payday. So everyone ran payroll on May 5th. paychecks will pull funds, or Gusto will pull all the payroll funds today, May 6th, but the employees got paid on May 7th. It's our opinion that it's that May 7th,
dated May 7th.
Yeah, it's the employee paycheck date that matters, that the other is just internal funds transfers to fund the payroll.
Oh, joy. Okay.
Yes. So watch your dates there. You can make that smaller. So then the other pieces you need to watch is anyone who has wages that will exceed $100,000 for the year do not count towards the forgiveness. And so here we have Ruby has $120,000 annual wages, so we've backed out her excess. And then if anyone is receiving wages under either of the leave credits, that their wages do not count for forgiveness. And so you need to back that part out. And so from that, we're getting our gross wages that we should be subject to forgiveness. Then the other one, so we're modeling rent, so we're going to make our 2 rent payments. And as much as possible, I would suggest making those rent payments with old-fashioned paper checks, so that when this goes into the bank audit, that's your cleanest audit trail. And then below we have a group of utilities. And then the pieces that aren't included on this quick spreadsheet are going to be employer portion of group health insurance and the employer match on retirement. That those will also be qualified costs. And then for both of those, again, watch the actual payment date, that confirm the day the check is actually written to the health insurance company. And then if you have a non-integrated 401k plan, and a lot of firms have a non-integrated 401k plan, and so they pay that employer match quarterly or annually, that if you don't write that check to forward the employer portion of that match into the retirement fund, I don't think it counts. So from this, you'd be able to calculate out a total of your forecasted forgiveness qualification, and then you can compare this to the amount of funds you receive from the bank for your PPP loan and calculate a deficit. We're finding quite a few firms that have a deficit, that they've received more PPP funds than they're going to be able to have forgiven with this process. We have quite a few firms that are just virtual, and so they're trying to spend 2.5 months of payroll in 2 months because they have no rent, they have no utilities, so they don't have that extra cushion. And then others, they just downsized over the last several months, and so their base for the loan was all of calendar 2019, and now at 2020 we just have a smaller firm. So that's kind of an overview of what we're looking at for the dollar value constraint. Before we jump into the FTEs, Francisco, do you have any questions?
My question, I mean, the one thing that I've been in a lot of ways struggling with is how to juggle the federal tax piece of this. So, like, you pay an employee and they've got a salary, or their pay is $3,000 a month, and then the business pays, the extra federal tax on that. But then there's also like this deduction out of their paycheck towards those same tax groups. How do we deal with those?
Right. So there's quite a bit of confusion 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there was some concern that on the forgiveness calculation, that if an employee has wages for this payroll of $5,000, but they had $500 of FICA, Medicare, and federal income taxes taken out, that their forgivable amount would be $4,500.
Mm-hmm.
that in the SBA fact documents, they've come out and said that no, if the employee's gross wages are $5,000, that the full $5,000 gross wages counts.
Okay, so
So
we don't need to back their portion of those things out. The full thing is forgivable.
right. So their gross, yeah. So the base is their gross wages. We can ignore the tax deductions. We can ignore retirement contributions, health insurance deductions, sort of on health insurance. So what we're doing is when the payroll is done, we're going to go ahead and list wages by person. So we'll print the payroll report, and we're going to come in and update the spreadsheet for each individual person who is on payroll, because we need that level of detail to do that $100,000 cap calculation.
Yeah. That's really, there's so many bizarre pieces to this that, okay, that's great. The other question that I had about this calculation was just to clarify, because this was something new again that I didn't realize until recently, that the payroll portion that's basically up in the top part of this spreadsheet, but the employee's payroll portion could be $100,000 annualized, and then on top of that is the retirement account contributions and the health insurance contributions from the employer. If the employer is paying those two things on top of their salary, right, then those two amounts are forgivable, even if the compensation down here is $100,000, right?
Correct. So in our example, that Ruby is over the 100K limit, but then Ruby also receives $500 of that retirement match, mm-hmm. and receives $700 of that health care benefit. That in this case, we only cap the gross wages, the fringe benefit stay in place. We don't have to back those out.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, we probably don't know the answer to this, but my brain always goes to, well, how can we use this as a strategy? Is there anything that you've seen in the rules that prohibits an employer, a business, from increasing those, group health or retirement benefits during this 8-week window?
See, this is where there's absolutely no rule.
There's no rule, right?
And when you get down to the end of the day, through the implementation of the loans, we've seen consistently information from the banks that directly conflict SBA guidance.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's going to be your bank who has to calculate the forgiveness and approve the calculation. And with all of the political pressure and the fraud we're already seeing on this, banks can find some pretty persnickety auditors. So the more you have to push it, the more you have to explain, the more uncomfortable it could get.
So that's a really good point, actually, for everybody. Not just how tough an audit might be, but whatever lender you borrowed, that you got this money from, that's the lender who's going to basically be trying to get your loan forgiven. In essence, they pulled out of their pool of investments your PPP money from their investors, from their capital. They gave it to the business, and then at the end of the 8 weeks, when you ask for forgiveness, they're going to look at your application, look at your records, and if they've got a defensible application, they're going to give that to the SBA, and the SBA, the way I understand it, is literally going to write the lender a check for that loan, because they gave you, the business, the money, and then they're going to get it back, and they're going to say, okay, now you're forgiven. You don't have to pay us back. And so they've got to have a document set that's based, you're stuck with that lender is what I mean. Whatever lender you went with, that's the lender you're stuck with in your application. So in another sense, that's why it might be advantageous to go with a small community bank, because you're just going to have a better relationship working with them, I think, on the individual side at the end of this thing. All right, next point here.
On one hand, the banks need documentation that they can defend to external auditors. On the other hand, these PPP loans hurt the local banks, so they're going to be pushing to get the full amount forgiven as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Because all these PPP loans are damaging their internal metrics and their ability to lend in the future.
Yeah, they're very low value assets on their balance sheet.
Okay.
Where to next, Paul?
So to have your loan fully forgiven, you have to cross two hurdles. So one is you have to spend the actual dollars, and then two, you have to go through a full-time equivalent calculation. So if you want to go to that FTE page, let's see here. Yeah, zoom this down to 100. So this is probably the more complicated version. But if you want to scroll to the bottom first, Francisco.
Sure.
Okay, so I think that section of like ending row 73.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to calculate the number of full-time equivalents employed by your firm during the 8-week spend period. So this is the period where you have some opportunity to plan and make changes. That your full-time, for the loan to be fully forgiven, your full-time equivalent number for this period has to be equal to or higher than, we have two choices. So if you scroll up, Francisco. So our first is a baseline for the first 2 months of 2020. So your full-time equivalents during the 8-week spend period have to be higher than the full-time equivalents you had in place for the beginning of 2020. Or if you scroll up one more, Francisco, or it has to be higher than your full-time equivalents for the period of February 15th through June 30th of 2019. Now the Act says this is based on average monthly full-time equivalents, but I'm not seeing any tremendous guidance on what is a full-time equivalent or how are they going to go and calculate that.
Or what that actually means.
So if you have a salaried employee, that's one full-time equivalent. But it's you have someone who works 30 hours a week. So for a lot of benefit calculations, that's a full-time equivalent. Or if you want to do the math and say, they work 30 hours of a 40-hour week, so they're 0.75. And then you start doing all the math on the part-time employees and how do you put this together, that there's not a lot of guidance.
Okay.
So what we're seeing as one planning point is to note that this is just base full-time equivalent. That you could have had a $150,000 associate attorney that left the firm, and so we just need to meet that full-time equivalent number. So you could potentially hire, a minimum wage intern to be a full-time employee for this 8-week spend out and have them do marketing or other filing. It's just full-time equivalent number.
Oh.
You don't have to replace a $120,000 a year person with another $120,000 person. It's just the head count number.
Okay. Well, that's good. So it's not, if we let people go who were at a higher salary, we don't have to replace them with the same salary. It's just a head count.
Well, assuming we can find other ways to meet the dollar spend requirement.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That if the full-time equivalent metric is what's binding, there's probably situations where you can hire someone as a minimum wage or $20 an hour, pay them their $4,000, but your loan forgiveness is going to move 20, because.
Gotcha.
Because if you want to go back to the budget. So say we had a $45,000 forgivable spend, so say we had that we spent $100,000 that is forgivable, but our FTE ratio is only 0.9, that now we can only have 90,000 forgiven because the full-time equivalents decreased.
Okay. Yeah. So if we add one person who maybe cost $3,000, we still have 100% full-time equivalent ratio, which means we can get the $100,000 forgiven, assuming all the expenses were qualified.
Right. There is some exception that no one seems to understand, that if your full-time equivalents were back up to some number by June 30th, that you meet the requirement.
Even if your 8-week spend period doesn't include June 30th.
Right. So if your FTEs are binding, do some homework to understand that requirement.
Okay.
So we had, so we went through the dollar constraint, we went through the FTE constraint. If you can call your bank and ask them for guidance, typically they're going to say, we don't know either. But maybe if you ask them every 2 weeks, they might finally find something for you.
Yeah, because the banks are going to be the ones who get to the point where they say, okay, your forgiveness application looks good, we'll submit it. And you're going to be you're going to want to operate under their guidance, essentially.
Right.
Awesome. I don't have time, I apologize everybody, to open it up for individual questions today. But if you do have questions, shoot me an email and I will do my best to answer them. If you're looking for help with accounting, ongoing business accounting services, I can't recommend Paul's firm enough. It's Paul, Paul Carlson, not just the law firm specific one, but the
so it's just,
Carlson.
Yeah, so Paul Carlson CPA.
Awesome. And feel free to reach out to him for help with that. But any questions on this PPP stuff, feel free to reach out to me directly. You guys should have my email, francisco@keystonelawfirm.com. Happy to try to help and get you guys pointed in the right direction. Otherwise, that's all we've got for today. Paul, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. And everybody, thank you as well. Look for the recording to be sent out here in an email either later today or tomorrow. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.